All right, but anyway, right here, everybody, the blood vascular and the lymph vascular. Blood vascular is blood, heart, and blood vessels. Okay, you know about a little bit about the blood. You know blood from 2401. You know, for example, that blood, there's erythrocytes, there are leukocytes. Never let monkeys eat bananas. You remember that? You remember that one from 2401? Never let monkeys eat bananas. Y'all remember that one? Neutrophil, lymphocyte, monocyte, eosinophil, basophil. Never let monkeys eat bananas. That goes from the most numerous to the least numerous of the white blood cells. White blood cells, their claim to fame is what? Is fighting infection. And what's the lymphocyte? What's the claim to fame for lymphocyte? Remember the B lymphocyte and the T lymphocyte? The B cells and the T cells? B cells give rise to plasma cells. Plasma cells give rise to antibodies. Y'all might not remember that. We're going to review that later. We will review it. We're going to go over it slowly. But so we've got the blood, red blood cells, white blood cells, you know, and we'll talk about polycythemia, too many red blood cells. We'll talk about leukopenia, too few white blood cells. We'll talk about anemias. We'll talk about leukemias, those different types of leukemia. We'll talk about those types of things. And blood. We'll get into the blood stuff. So our blood volume, we'll talk about the average blood volume of everybody is about 5.4 liters. That's the average. Males generally have a little more blood than females, generally. But again, that varies from individual to individual. So our blood, the condition of our blood is very important in our well-being. The lymph vessels and, of course, the lymph glands. We don't get into that too much. We tell where lymph comes from and that sort of thing. A little bit about the makeup of lymph stuff. You can name a lymph vessel. Remember we talked about the lacteal. We talked about the thoracic duct. The thoracic duct coming up and emptying these chylomicrons into the left subclavian vein. So you can name a lymph vessel. Thoracic duct, lacteal. You can name some of those things, but we don't get into the lymph that much, okay? But we will mention it. Okay, now, right here, together the blood vascular and the lymph vascular comprise what we call the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular or circulatory. That is the lymph, so that's what we get into. Cardiovascular or circulatory. So the cardiovascular includes the blood vascular and the lymph vascular. The cardiovascular. And really the lymph stuff, everybody, the lymph stuff is more like in breast cancer. They say, okay, we remove these lymph nodules of the lymph nodes. They had to remove two lymph nodes. All right, or they look at lymph nodes to see if this stuff maybe is metastasized to the nodes. And they'll check the nodes many times to determine the severity of the malignancy. And so they'll check the lymph. In the lymph system, things can move very quickly in the lymph system. So that's about all we really mention on the lymph stuff. Now blood, and you remember this from 2401. Blood is classified as connective tissue. Any of y'all remember that? It's connective tissue with a liquid matrix. What is the liquid matrix? That is the plasma, okay, in which cells or cell-like fragments are suspended, and that's going to be the blood cells. A fragment would be a platelet. A blood platelet is a fragment, which we'll go through the development of those things later on. The platelet count is very important, y'all. The platelet count, if your platelet count is not high enough, they won't do surgery on you because your blood won't clot, okay? You've been taking aspirin. We'll talk about what some of these things do. A person's been taking an 81 milligram aspirin twice a day. You know, if something emergency like comes up, they won't do surgery till it. And if it's an emergency now, they have to do it. But you probably end up in ICU with blood transfusions because blood won't clot. And we'll talk about why. What does aspirin do? Aspirin actually interferes with a prostaglandin, a hormone-like substance that's necessary for a platelet factor to form, a blood clotting platelet factor to form. And aspirin interferes with that, and so the platelet plug won't happen, and that's one of the initial things in blood clotting, the platelet plug. All right, so if a patient's taking aspirin, they'll say, okay, Mr. Westmoreland, don't take an aspirin. We got to do some surgery on you. Don't take aspirin for a week and a half. Then we'll do the surgery. If it's an emergency, though, then they have to be ready to do blood transfusions after the surgery. All right, so anyway, we'll get into all that kind of stuff a little bit later on. All right, so what are examples of lymph? I ask you this one right here. What are examples of lymph vessels we've already discussed? The lacteal is one, and the thoracic duct is one, and there are others. The lacteal, L-A-C-T-E-A-L, and the thoracic duct.